Good evening, everybody. I'm Sherry Stout with Main Street Reads, and I'm thrilled tonight to have the chance to interview J.L. Oakley, author of several books, but her most recent, The Quisling Factor, is an international book club pick of the year for 2021. It's very exciting. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But I just want to let everybody get a chance to know Janet as we go. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to hand it over to Janet and have her tell us a little bit more with the aid of a PowerPoint what she is doing with her book, and then I'm going to come back with a few questions. So are you ready, Janet Oakley?
I am ready.
Take it away. So Janet's going to share her screen with you.
I have to get it. I have to go back again. I thought I was ready to go.
Best plans, I know.
Best laid plans. Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me because it's on my list. I've never been to South Carolina, and I'm hoping that maybe
come on, yeah.
I'm going to have to do it. I have a really good friend from college in North Carolina. I think another college friend in South Carolina. So I got to make the trip before I get to.
Great.
Anyway, I'm going to talk tonight about the history behind the Quisling Factor. You know, today is like the Holocaust Day, and there actually is something that happened in Norway. A lot of people don't know about what happened, what it is all about. So I'm going to go through some of the background in the story. Even if you haven't read it, when you do read it, you'll see the context. This is a sequel to the Quisling affair. So in the Quisling affair, at the end of the novel, the main character, Ture Hogland, he's a Norwegian who was trained by the British to be an agent. And he falls in love, giving the story away, with a woman who is accused of betraying her husband. She is actually American. She was born in Maryland, but her father was German. So she has this long story and how they fell in love and all that, and how he trusted her, because that was one of the highlights of people that I interviewed for the first novel. They said the fifth freedom was the freedom to trust. And that just stayed with me all this time. So he's a survivor. He's looking for peace and something that might resemble his old life. And he has physical challenge. He was brutally tortured by a real person. He's fictional, but based on many things that I've read. So he has a damaged hand. And he also is suffering from PTSD. And so the idea is that war and occupation does not end with liberation. And by the way, they were liberated the day after VE Day. The Germans could have hung on another 6 months in Norway. So it becomes a whole new story, you know, what is happening afterwards. And this is definitely something I want to explore. And mainly the idea is that what does Quisling mean? And what is this trial of Henry Allen written? He was Norway's he was number 2 war criminal. And he was expensive and notorious trial for over 5 to 6 decades. And this is the cover is actually from Trondheim, where part of the story takes place. And this is Port Christiansen in winter. And I think it's a perfect background. I actually hiked up there with my hostess, and it's a long hike.
It feels about that cold down here in South Carolina tonight.
Oh yeah, you're not having fog. I pity you. You know, I grew up in Maryland, Maryland, Pittsburgh, but
I grew up in Chicago. So yeah.
Well, you know.
I'm a big baby now. Yeah.
Yeah, so how did the war affect people? That was one of the questions. And how did they manage? Because, when a war ends, we went all our GIs home. I read about it in the New York Times, GIs coming home on my birthday, which is February 5th, 1947. So they're still coming back, our troops, but, they're coming by boat and in planes. So, but the rest of the countries in Europe, they were a mess, and that just was very chaotic. So I want to give a brief history of World War II in Norway, because a lot of people don't know about it. Essentially, it was attacked by the Germans, a simultaneous attack the whole length of this of this country. And you're actually looking at the lower part because it's one of the longest, skinniest countries in the world, but definitely in Europe. And they attacked in Trondheim, which is up here. Bergen is here. This is became a very important U-boat base. Then Oslo. And then they also attacked way north. And they were also attacking Denmark and the Netherlands the very same day. It's this amazing, mind-boggling thing. So the leader of the National Samling, which was their pro-Nazi program, there was a man by the name of Vidkun Quisling. And he started out really almost as a good person, because after World War I, he was behind helping the Russians, which had been very, and other countries devastated by World War I. He was helping with relief aid. But, you know, it's curious how people change. And during the 30s, he started coming almost like America first, but it's kind of like Norway first in the 30s. And so he actually met with Hitler a couple of times in 39. I think he met him prior to that, maybe 37. And just days before the invasion, he met with intelligence agents that were Nazi. I think he went to the Netherlands, or it says Copenhagen. So anyway, on the night of the 9th, they're attacking out in Oslo Bay and all these different places. He gets on the radio and proclaims himself the prime minister and the new government. And of course, King Haakon would reject this plan. And in the meantime, if you want to watch a wonderful film, The King's Choice, it's still on Netflix. And we'll give you an idea, because the king was a constitutional king, and he was elected by the people of Norway to become their king, because they had always been under Sweden. And so he's fleeing up north and to the center of the country. And there is some resistance going on. These are some people are shocked to see this going on in Norway. You just don't imagine what's going on. Molde is out on the coast, and it was also very important. And this is where another side story is how the gold of Norway got out. Some went out that way and some went further north, and ended up finally in Baltimore, Maryland. But this is actually an official photograph from the Germans, and but showing the bombing and all the things heading on. But June 10th, it was over mainly because France fell, and the Allies withdrew. They tried to stop the Germans in the north. So countries occupied. These are soldiers coming into Trondheim, which is in the middle of the country where my story takes place. And this is a display at the Resistance Museum in Trondheim. So what was it like living there? This is actually, up here is where the Fort Christensen is. This is a wonderful bridge called the Gammel Bridge, which means old bridge. And they're guarding the bridge, because this will bring you into the main part of Trondheim. So Josef Terboven, he was named Reichskommissar for Norway. Just, we're looking at just 2 weeks later. He was a personal friend of Hitler, and he was very brutal and vindictive. He had a personal command of 6,000 men, including the secret police, which was called Stipo. And then Quisling will become prime minister, but they kind of went like, wait, who is this guy? And they kind of kicked him back. He's standing right up here on the right. And then up here is Terboven. So the Gestapo arrived right around it. These are the soldiers arriving at the Phoenix Museum. It's called the Phoenix. They say Phoenix, I think, in Norwegian. But it's a very nice hotel in Trondheim. They can't change the name because they have a award-winning fountain in front of the hotel. And then this is Victoria Terrasse. And this is in Oslo. It's still there. And the State Department had been there and other things, official businesses of Norway. So the Gestapo is right there on the head of everything. This is an interesting thing up here. My picture is kind of in the way. I'll get out of the way, but you'll see that this is Max Magnus, and he was one of the leading guys in resistance later on. There's also a wonderful movie about him. He was responsible for a lot of things being blown up in Oslo. It's a very good movie. I don't know if it's on Netflix, but you might be able to find it elsewhere. It gives you an idea of these organizations. But anyway, this is the police report that was put out, and he's listed there. So what was it like? So you couldn't sing the national anthem or fly the flag of Norway. You had to be restricted where you went. You had to have an ID card and a pass. An aggression pass was for the coast, and they considered the North Sea a border. And so they had to have an extra border pass. Anyone with a disability, such as deafness, and of course that's a theme in both novels, they needed a medical card to be exempt from labor projects. And across the country, radios were collected and banned. Newspapers were forced to carry on only NS News, so it's National Somling. Listening to broadcasts from BBC or reading an underground newspaper could mean a death sentence. And today I was just looking up, because we were talking about what's happening in some of the school districts about banning books. So I went and looked up the books that were banned in Norway. Of course, any Jewish author was banned. Anybody who was deemed a communist was banned. But I also found out that Edna Ferber, who wrote Showboat and, Giant, which made the musical. Showboat's awesome. I was a kid doing that years ago. And then the other one, Giant, that was a big movie in the late 50s, big colored, I think it was the whole 9 yards, color and, whatever, graphic. But it was banned because she was an American. But she also has, in Showboat, she's got talking about racism in Showboat. So all these things are banned. The other thing too is that, we could not fish behind the 50-mile limit. You could be blasted out of the water, and you had to keep a sign in your boat saying you had to have this thing, that if you didn't have this thing, you could be stopped and you would be fined. And, everything, this is people lining up in Oslo. And one of the men I interviewed, he actually gave me his lunch card. And this is for the bunker that they were building in Trondheim. It's still there. They couldn't blast it out of the water, so they're now using it for an archives. The National Somling, we have both, they were modeled on the German Nazi Party. So this is the guys over here, the herd, and over here are the women. They're marching in Oslo. And, we don't think of Norway. We just don't think about all these things. We've seen everything that happened in the European countries. This is kind of interesting. The pin that's here, this cross is St. Olaf, and the NS corrupted it. But it, that really irked a lot of people. The one over here on the right too, I'm in the way. Both are with St. Olaf. And eventually they were armed. A lot of people are shocked about concentration camps, and I'm on a World War II Facebook group, and we're talking about what's happening. Of course, today is the day I think Auschwitz was liberated, but people don't know about Greenie. Greenie was for political prisoners, and often it was a stopping point. Maybe you had an illegal radio and you were put there, or you belonged to a group that was resisting and you were put there, and maybe you would end up eventually in a concentration camp in Germany or Poland. But Falstad is north of Trondheim, and many Jews. They had a very small population of Jews in Norway, and several ended up there. So the resistance organizes, and these are in the books, but I'll just quickly go through them. Milorg is the military one; it's the most important one. Sivorg means civilian organization, of which Conrad Bonnie Svensson, who was one of my heroes, he was a minister for the deaf in Norway. He signed all his sermons in sign language, and he also was secretly very, very high up in the resistance. And it's so funny because the nice thing is people write to me, and one of them is a gentleman named George, who is from Nevada, originally from Salt Lake, but he's Norwegian. And he read Quisling, and through my website, he said, no one knows Quisling. And he told this tale of how he met one of the great resistant workers in Salt Lake City. And I answered back and I said, oh, thank you very much. And I said, one of my heroes is Conrad Bonnie Svensson. Well, he wrote back and he said, my parents were deaf. They had scarlet fever in the 20s and 30s in Norway. And his mother especially was very deaf, and she would eventually lose her eyesight. I think his father also had hearing problems too from scarlet fever. Well, they got married in the deaf church in Oslo.
Oh, wow.
He was baptized in the Oslo. And the funny thing is his apartment was next to the railroad station, which got blown up by the resistance. So when he met this hero in Salt Lake City, he said, you realize you woke me up because I was an infant in the bed because their apartment was right next. Anyway, the funny thing about writing these books is the connections that you make. And everybody finds that, you find
Yeah, we really, really are one world, right?
it is a one world thing, and many Norwegians did immigrate to the United States because the conditions were really bad in Norway after the war. XU was a very secret group. They couldn't talk about themselves for 40 years. X for unknown and U for undercover, which is what my character was. And then they work with SONE Norway, and then SIS is the Secret Intelligence Service. This is the Heavy Water War. That's another book. I think that's still on Netflix. And it's amazing dramatization of the bombing of the heavy water plant in Norway. It's very well done. It has subtitles. It's Norwegian, German, and English. The Shetland bus also figures in my story, and I hope one of these days to go to the Shetland Islands. This is the Hitra right here, which is in Bergen now. But this is how they started off. They almost immediately after the invasion, people were jumping on boats and heading to England and the Shetland Islands, and they finally organized to what they call the North Sea traffic. And this is the author, which later would become a very famous book. The thing about these fishing boats, you can see the wheelhouses in the back. And when it went, it had a special kind of motor, went tonk, 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 tonk. And you could go from miles away. And this is some of the research. I got so much help from historians in Norway, but this is the actual time and how many hours it took to come from the Shetlands to the coast of Norway. They never went down to Oslo. I think the farthest they went was Stavanger, but mostly Bergen and moving up. I love this one. This is I think this is in the Bergen archives in that city. This seems not done with NS. And when you see this is a symbol of King Haakon. So it's the H for him and 7. And that was a sign of resistance. Sometimes they put it in the snow just to irk the Germans.
Wow.
So when the war was over, they were liberated. They were there 5 long years. Remember, Paris was liberated in August 25th, 1944. The Norwegians had to wait all this time, and no one came to help them. And what happened is that the Gestapo really got nasty. They got really nasty. Especially the last few months in 45. The Russians will liberate northern Norway in November 1945. They chased the Germans out of Finland into Norway, and they occupied it up there. And that's another story. It's still going on today. It's about the border. Anyway, so Hitler's dead. The Russians are in Berlin. The Allies have cut the forces in half. So we also have going on the Mjolnir men and women. They're also training. They've been training. Sweden finally allowed them to train, and so they're ready to go. And they have what they call the Swedish police or the Norwegian police. They have been trained on how to keep order because they're worried about your plants being blown up, because there were still people hanging on, and they really weren't sure if the Germans were going to surrender. But they did surrender mainly because of Eisenhower. He kept pressing them, saying you need to. They had so many German soldiers in Norway. Processing will become a huge problem. So what would happen? So the way it worked, this is unbelievable. They had 360,000 Germans in Norway with a population of 3 million. 3 million was the size of Berlin in 1940. So they were in firm control, and would the Allies have to go fight there next? So okay, they surrendered on the continent, but they're not going to give up there. So they had batteries along all. This is the map that one of the historians sent me, showing all these batteries going up the coast. This is where part of my story takes place. But they had huge U-boat pens. These would go out and go after all the merchant boats that were the convoy going up north. So and they actually had planned to build a city of 300,000 German residents. They planned to stay in Norway. And this area, I mean, you have to go to Trondheim. It's spectacular. I love it. But they planned, but because of other things happened, and most notoriously the final solution, they were finally, I think they're also fighting the Russians. They stopped the plans, but it was all laid out. And it would have been right down in this area here. So they weren't going to give up. Their soldiers were arrested, and there was no fighting on the Eastern Front because German soldiers did not want to go fight on the Eastern Front. That would be a punishment if you were sent there. And so they're really relaxed. This guy's relaxing at the Technical Institute. So most radical Nazis were in Norway. And so Verhoeven was not going to give up, and neither was Wilhelm Radies. He's standing right here. These are dangerous, psychotic people. This guy came up to Trondheim when they publicly executed 10 men. They had a big party the night before. He was sick is the word. So anyway, they're negotiating. So Hitler's dead. Bohm is now the commander in Norway, but also he's negotiating with Haga, who's the head of Milorg, and they come up with a solution. By now, the resistance is living in tunnels under Oslo. And my friend Robert Degoni was going to be invited to see it, but it said it's secret, so they don't let people go in. But the tunnels are still there underneath the whole city of Oslo. And they agreed that the Norwegian police could come out on May 8th and you could start publishing. And on May 8th, it's free. I love this picture. These are kids in Trondheim bringing their hidden flags. It's so cool. They were free. And the bells rang. This is the main downtown part of Trondheim. So the church bells rang, but they did not actually surrender until the 9th because they were waiting for British officers to come. Because remember, we just have this small force of people, and you got 360,000 German soldiers.
Wow.
And this again is Trondheim. And from the radio in London, all these people are downtown Trondheim listening to him on the radio. Can you imagine what that was like? I love this picture that was taken seconds afterwards. And people are so excited, they're just beside themselves. So officially the Germans surrendered, Quisling and 6 other, and they surrendered in Oslo headquarters. Meanwhile, while they're celebrating, there's work to do. So they had already been drawing up lists, probably for 6 months, maybe a couple of years, of who do they need to arrest, who Quislings, who had worked, because it means traitor, who would work openly with the Germans or even became part of the German structure. So they began to start arresting the very same day on the 8th. And the herd, of course, these guys eventually became militarized and were pretty nasty. They're all Norwegians. And they were, doing horrible things. This is an example. These 2 gentlemen are Norwegians, but they were in the Gestapo. And the other guys, they're so funky looking when we look at them today, but they're wearing armbands. And this signified they are with Milorg or they're with the resistance, and they're trained. They know how to, he's holding a Sten gun right here. You can't see it under, but this gentleman, you can see the small arms. And there was immediate research for Brennan. So this is his house as it looked, 46. And I actually went by it. One of my hosts, Tora Egan, we drove by the alley. It's rented out. It's still around. I think if it was in the States, we'd blow it up out of the water because horrible things went on there. But that's what it looked like. But the men were gone. So there was so why was he so important? Why did I have this story in Quisling? Because he was from Levanger, which we went up to visit. Today is kind of like, I don't know, Plymouth, Massachusetts, or Friday Harbor is a good example here in the north. It's kind of like a party town today. It's the fjord is very long, kind of like Puget Sound, and it's a lovely little town. And we went up and had dinner up there, and but he was from there. He was recruited in the summer of 40, and he ran the torture chamber called the Cloister. And we had over 1,000 agents, and those things went through it until liberation. And here he is at trial. Here is this famous thing. It's all through both books. This horrible poster. It's in the basement. It's now at the museum, the Justice Museum. It says, "Welcome to the party."
Oh,
You would have nightmares about that, which my character does. This is the Swedish police arriving at Trondheim. This is like, I think this is the 11th. They're coming over the Swedish border, which is only about 60 miles away, I found out. And they're coming down to maintain order. So that very same day, Volin is in the story too. And how I figured out how to break out of Volin was another story. But this is where political prisoners are held, and they're waiting for people to be released. The fun part is this round structure back here. That's part of the student union. So this was a city jail, and the student union is still there. And then over here is Falstad. And this is how it looked after the war. I think immediately after the war. Here's an idea of the Trondheim fjord. It's a very long fjord, and there's more mainland out there, and it's a beautiful place. So my host took me there, and we first went down to the buildings, then came back, because this was used as an extrajudicial execution of POWs. A lot of them were Russian, Ukraine, and Yugoslav, especially Yugoslav. People don't know that there's probably 30,000 plus POW from Russia and Yugoslavia who were slaves. They had them work on projects. One of the first men I ever interviewed, 28 years ago, he was crying for the man in his little fjord village on the West Coast who lived in a hole with a tin roof over top. They were treated horribly, and a lot of them ended up being killed here. So we walk through here, and you just see all these little monuments. And my hostess, after a while, we just started putting little seeds and stuff on it, like the rocks you put on a grave, you know. It was very moving. These are probably had maybe, I don't know, 12 to 15 people in one grave.
wow.
And one of the things they had, and as people do afterwards, is dig up. So this is part of the getting the healing part. It's happening all in a matter of a few days. They're going to liberate these places. They're going to get the people back. There's wonderful pictures of people arriving back from concentration camps in, you know, in Poland, and they're united, but they would make them work and dig these graves up and identify. The king arrives in June. Here's Prince Håkon. If you've seen Atlantic Crossing, some of you may have seen it on PBS, check it out. It's about Queen Martha, and she lived first with the Roosevelts and then had her own place in Maryland. It's a wonderful story, but here they arrived, and here's King Håkon. So what's the problem? Well, we have 360 Germans. You have to identify who's Gestapo and who's in the SD, which is this organization that was under Terboven's thing, and they were vicious. They did a lot of raids and stuff like that, because a lot of people hid in the ranks. And then these two they killed themselves. They had over 20,000, who knows how many. They had to get them back to where they're going. And there is a story, and I believe it is true, that many Russians did not want to go back because it's Stalin. And some of them had easier lives. I might be working in some village, but they got to know Norwegians, and Norwegians were kind to them. And there is a story, and I believe it's true. There was a group, they were executed by Stalin because they had been tainted by, you know, Western, you know, being there 5 years, you can get a different political view. Here are the German soldiers getting ready to leave. So it took a long time. The last unit left in 1946, just as the trials are going on. So what is the legal purge? So this is the format of the story. My character is going to testify against Rinnan. And what's really astonishing, I spent 4 hours at the Justice Museum in Trondheim. The head advisor there is a retired police officer who spent decades studying the trials. He's always been interested as a policeman. So we had 90,000 Norwegians investigated. So when they all did all this arresting, nearly a bunch of them were convicted, and some given hard labor, some giving, you know, not so easy stuff, but they lost the right to vote. Some were fined. I think 52, 53, which really annoyed my contact there at the Justice Museum. He said, they just finally let them go. They felt they served enough time. But there was always this, so Quisling was put on trial right away. And he said, having all my thoughts and deeds have been led by my love for the Norwegian people. But they pretty weren't buying it, and he was one of the first to be executed. There's still controversy about that today, and part of it had to do, which is too complicated because the political issue, but because they had a government exile. So when my story begins, it's a year later, and one of the things that's happening, this is an aside, but my character has a badly damaged hand. And so I start the story in Maryland, because it turns out that Johns Hopkins was the leading orthopedic surgeon, place for any kind of surgery in the world. And so I was really fascinated with that. So I thought I'll put him there. Then I didn't know, oh, how do they take care of hands back there? Because, we've learned a lot since Vietnam about how to take care of badly injured hands. And his hand is kind of like this. He can't move it very well because it was damaged and like it's being tortured. So anyway, this is what I do with research, because back then there was no internet when I started writing the Quisling Affair. Now I start searching. So I finally found the Hand Surgeons of America. I just emailed them. And I said, could you have someone tell me techniques that was used to help a hand to restore, flexibility and stuff? Well, they turned me on to their educator, who happened to live in Vancouver, Washington. So I sent him the text of what I had written in Quisling, what was going on with his hand. And he wrote back and he told me what went on. So that's kind of the research that I do. I want to make it right. So his hand can flex. And he said, yeah, you'll have to have it in a half glove. And he said, scars start forming, in 3 weeks, all this stuff. So I have it all paced, the whole hand issues in there. The other thing though that's going on is PTSD, and Quisling's an industry. And then the razzia at Televoke. And again, a lot of Americans didn't know about Televoke. And that is another theme that's going on, how this damaged so many people. This was like the #1 crime that the Germans did, as far as Norwegian was concerned. So, so these are the things that are in the book. And I wanted to talk about too, the idea of PTSD, because we think of, we know about it from World War II with our own soldiers. They even had Soldier's Heart in the Civil War. And we've talked about PTSD as sort of the new word that we use for Vietnam and Iraq and all that. But the idea is that your hero and you're undercover, would you suffer for something like that? So one of them, they actually have a monument to him, I think in Olsen, but Gunnar Tomstad, he posed as a Nazi sympathizer. His book is amazing that he wrote. And this is one of the many memoirs I read that were written in the 1950s. But he worked as a radio operator, and he suffered physically and mentally after war. And I was shocked. He died like 51, or even younger than that. He was in his early 40s, I think. But he always carried a letter from King Haakon saying that he was a Quisling. People hated him so much, believed him so much. It was hard. He could not even tell his own mother. He did finally tell a woman who later married his secret, because he got very ill with pneumonia. And it's this idea of this trust is the fifth freedom. And he trusted this woman he had gotten to know. And she saved him. She hid him and got help for him. I went too far back, so I need to go back. So the other one is Max Manus, and I told you there's a wonderful book about movie about him. He was highly decorated. He was a guard for Prince Olaf. He did incredible as a person who was blowing up things that are important. But he was a young man. I mean, all these guys were like, he's older, Tom, but he was young. He was probably 20. And he suffered from nightmares and alcoholism and bouts of depression. The other hero, who's a wonderful person, is Joachim Jonneberg. And he's led the heavy water brigade. And in some ways, I think my character looks like him, what they call dark Norwegian. but I love what he did. I was so shocked. He went into public television after the war. We're talking about 1947, public TV in Norway. I thought, that's crazy. And he seemed to adjust very well. I mean, the heavy water thing, if you watch the movie or read about it, it's amazing. On skis, going down a gorge, going and blow this place up. And he just passed away 2 years ago, I think. And he said he never talked about what he did until the 70s, when things were starting to fade away. He got worried. He said, you need to know what happened, about people lost their rights, and the whole thing about the legal thing. When I had the talks with the Justice Museum, he said the thing they wanted to restore was their own justice, not the Nazi exclusive, only for our people justice. So the legal tours kind of went through this. So one of the things they're talking about today is the North Hydro. They made crucial materials for the German Luftwaffe. And some people said, the Norwegian railroad should be reprimanded, because they were carrying all these POWs to build these rails from Mo Rana to Fosca. It's way up north. It's brittle. We're talking about Minnesota right now. I think it's like -15. It's very, very cold up there. And they also rounded up the Jews. Televogue, I'll go through this quickly. So, I mean, I could go on forever talking about this. But Televogue is over here. Here's Bergen. Trondheim's way up here. And this is the island of Sotra. And it became a drop-off point for the Shetland bus, because if you could go from here and take the ferry to Bergen, then you could go this way, this way. And this is how the boats looked in the very early years. And this gentleman and his son often hid agents coming over. So at least, they say almost 500 people fled to the Shetlands from Televogue. Agents would come back with arms, refugees, some of them are Jews, but some people got in trouble, with the Gestapo, and they would send them over. I have all the radio communications now from this area. It's just amazing. So an informer told about 2 agents that showed up, and they had a fight out. They were killed to these 2 German officers. And by now, you've got the teachers on strike. You've got people up in Trondheim are having none of it. So they're refusing to go to the Nidaros Cathedral and support the new Nazi dean of the cathedral. So Trondheim's getting kind of uppity. And the Germans decided, we need to teach these people a lesson. So what they did, Terboven came, and we're just going to take this place apart. So this is only how many lived there. 450 people of Televogue were sent into German captivity. So the first part, all the men were arrested. And this is the scene of them marching down to the boats. 16 to 65 is sort of how they did it in Germany. Any place, it was always 16 to 60 or 65. So they had young kids going with their fathers and grandfathers. So they went to Greenie, and then they were sent to Schatzenhausen. And of the 70 men that went, only 31 of them died. Lars Tella, the son, was executed. 7 of those arrested were named NN, and what NNN means Nakanabel, and he disappeared. They no idea what happened to them. So even before they left for Schatzenhausen, they disappeared. And then the 18, so this is also a piece in both Jussing and the Quisling Factor. I have a character, the brother of my hero. He's part of this group. And these young men were just trying to go to the Shetland Islands. They got arrested in February of 1942, and they were executed just to teach a lesson. But they all returned in March. So they were early release when Germany was really falling apart. What they called the white buses picked the men up and brought them home. So this is what it looked like. This is German pictures showing blowing up the houses. They blew up all of the buildings. They killed all the cows. They blew up all the boats. The intent was to completely wipe them from the earth. It's called the Lydis of the North. Lydis happened a couple of months later, or even weeks later, which is a horrible thing. They just wiped out a village, I believe in Czechoslovakia or Poland.
What brought you to write this book, Janet?
Well, when I first was researching the Using affair, I found a wonderful book called Blood of the Midnight Sun, because I dreamed about someone in the snow with German soldiers around him, and it was snowing. And I thought, oh, that must be Norway. So a friend had me write it down. She happened to be an editor. She says, write it down. So I wrote, it was a dream. So I wrote the prologue. But then I had to go like, wait a minute, I need to know about Norway. So I found this book. I found Renan in it. I found Televogue in it. And I think because I was researching stuff in the 90s. That's when I started writing it 28 years ago. And it's all the stuff about World War II. There's nothing about Norway. And I started interviewing men in the local Norwegian men corral. We have 2 in my neck of the woods. And I started interviewing people. They were in their 50s, they were in their 60s. And I think I ended up thinking, like, I need to tell this story. It's just like Kathy Murphy said, it's all about story.
Yeah.
And it really got to me. And Televogue, I think I threw everything in the kitchen sink into Using, everything that I could find out about it, but over the years, it's become to mean a whole lot more. And I've been in touch with the museum. It's called the North Sea Traffic Museum. It's in Televogue, and they tell the story. They've done wonderful stuff on the Norwegian, on the Norwegian TV. In fact, I don't really speak Norwegian. I was going to show you this. A friend just gave this to me. It's Richard Scarry in Norwegian. Wow. My kids, so this will help me with my learning more words, but this is the book my boys had. So it's in Norwegian. My friend just gave it to me yesterday. But anyway, I think I felt after a while, because people keep coming up to me and telling their stories. And I feel it's a privilege. And one person said, you're not Norwegian, but I think we needed someone outside of that to tell the story, because it's either so painful, or you might say, maybe my granddad wasn't up to good, that kind of thing. And people just keep telling me their stories. Wow. And I feel honored that they tell me I got it right, like especially Trondheim. And I crack up because I said, well, I had British Naval Intelligence spy maps, so that helps. And then finally going there. But it just compelled me. And I've written other books since then. And I really didn't publish Using until I think 16. I think it's been 5 years.
How long did it take you to write overall?
Well, the actual first draft, 3.5 years. And then I put it aside. I kept pitching it, and it actually won, finalists of the Pacific Northwest Writers, but I could never get an agent, because they'd either say, no one's writing about World War II in Norway, but then they sit down. My dad was on the Shetland bus, they tell me, but they just didn't pick it up. I mean, I had full reads and everything, but I always protected it. I think it's my best book. And so I feel that this enormous privilege. And I'm writing a prequel, and then I have a sequel in mind. And that'll probably be it, I think. I don't know. Okay. The response has been really great. I mean, it's gone really well. And the audiobook is just flying off the...
Yeah, tell me about that. You were mentioning that before we got started on this. So you've had it done in audio? It is available on Libro, right?
It's very, and I want to support all the indie bookstores so they can get it. It's available. So Chris Humphreys is my narrator. He's also known as C.C. Humphreys. And he has an interesting story because his own mother was in the Norwegian resistance in the very early years of the war. And I met him at various conferences. I first met him in Denver with the Historical Novel Society, but I also go to Surrey Writers, which is over the border.
I was there with you, yes.
That's right.
That's the one that, one of the keynotes, I spoke there too, and one of the keynotes was Diana Gabaldon. They had just, they just inked the deal for Showtime, was it, for Outlander?
Yeah, for Stars. Yeah, and so I first met her in 2002 because I started going to Surrey, actually 2001, just after 9/11. We were pretty shattered Americans going up to Canada, and they were so nice to us. Yeah. But I first met her there, and I was so impressed because she would come early and go work at a youth center, kids in trouble, and teach writing. I thought, wow, that's the writer for me, because I was just starting to read Outlander. Yeah, I was there too a couple of years. I actually was on her monitor for a couple of her talks, and
Yeah.
had to sit out and all that.
Oh, she was adorable. And I love that story she told about who was going to play Jamie when she found out the actor was going to play Jamie. And she said she'd only seen pictures of him. He's a character actor, and she said, but he's grotesque. And then, of course, he's ended up being a heartthrob, and she loved him when she actually met him. But at first she was like, "Ooh, I don't know. But yeah, we were in, I have a good friend in Toronto, and we had planned a trip, me and another friend from Michigan, to go up to Toronto to see her. And it ended up being that week after 9/11. And of course, our families didn't want us to go. And we said, no, they don't get to stop us from doing what we're going to do. So we went to Toronto anyway. And it was the coolest thing. I mean, the Canadians were just so amazing. And we went to the farmer's market that Saturday morning when we were there. And our friend from there told somebody at the farmer's market that she had, American friends visiting. And so they had a band. They always have a band playing at the farmer's market Saturdays there. And they played the national anthem. It was so cute.
They were so kind to us, and so that was my first, but I pitched it up there too. And back then they usually had Canadian representatives that were associated with New York agents, but then Donald Moss married a local girl. And so big agents just came directly from New York. It's a wonderful conference. It's just a blast.
Very cool.
So, but anyway, so I had met Chris a couple of times, but he started asking me questions because he'd come down to Chanticleer. And he started asking me questions about 3 years ago. It's like, where do you get your research? Well, it turns out he's just finished the draft. And it's called the Night Sonata, I think it's called, because his mother was in the resistance, but his father was an RAF pilot. And they met in Scotland.
Oh, great.
And so he's written a story. It's based on, the two of them meeting and all like that. But so I was telling people about, I don't know, about 3 months ago, he emailed me. He said, can you tell me about the Tonschenschlager, which is this horrible torture instrument, which I got to handle in Trondheim. And I said, oh yeah, I'm the expert on torture instruments. I sent him pictures, and because he wanted to have it in there. But we've got a cute relation. He's such a gentleman. But this thing is, it's just incredible. I've got 101 reviews on Chirp, so I'm really, really, really happy.
Fantastic.
And he'll do Quisling. So when he gets back, he'll start in March. And
very good. Yeah, let us know when that happens, and we'll shout it out.
I'm extremely excited about it. So
very good.
Well, anyway, I'll just go on because I could go on forever. But just to give an idea of the range of this, because one of the issues in Quisling is his sister. To tell that story, have a sister involved with that, and to tell about another part of the story about Televog is his uncle who's deaf, where he learns to sign, and that's a whole nother thing. So here's something else. This is from the Deaf Museum. They have a National Deaf Museum now in Trondheim. So I spent some time there, but I mean, this is the kind of research I go into.
Right.
But I wanted to tell the story about Conrad Bonnie Svensson. So I have an uncle who is deaf. He's a painter. And also, Hoglitz on how he knows how to sign, and pull off being, pretending to be deaf. But this is the whole range here. Here are the little kids. They actually separated the 6-year-olds from the babies. And one of the most remarkable stories. So they stayed at this high school, and then eventually they're all reunited. But one of the most amazing stories I just learned about 1.5 years ago was this gentleman. He was from Bergen, and he went to the United States. He worked at Johns Hopkins, and he was a bacteriologist, and he studied Pasteur, and then he became an expert on tuberculosis. So he returned in 1937, but he became the leader of the Red Cross in Western Norway. So they, the Germans kind of accepted we can have the Red Cross. You can have packages come from prisoners in Germany. But he saw the kids there, and he heard a rumor that they might be separated from the mothers and sent to Germany to be trained to be proper Germans. So he did something that was unethical, but also, boy, I have a lot of misspelling there. Unethical, that he knew all the kids had been vaccinated against diphtheria because they had that in the 30s and 40s, and he gave it to the kids. And the Germans were germaphobes, terrible germaphobes. And when they realized the kids had symptoms that looked like diphtheria, they're going to be very mild, they just stopped it. It never happened. So all the kids were eventually sent up to Framnäs, which is, it's south of Bergen in the mountains. And this is after they're all together and they're going to go home back to Trelleborg. So that's what it looks like today. I hope to go there. And finally, the hunt for Renan. So I'll only go through this quickly because we're probably running out of time. Like I said, I could just go on. But they went immediately looking for him. So he got away and he took 2 hostages with him, a man and a woman. And this hostage was very badly beaten and tortured. And he had a brand mark on his hip, which ended up being, he had a swastika put on his hip, which ends up being testimony in the actual trial. And he was able to escape in a snowstorm. They had been stopped by a blizzard. So you can see way up here, here's Trondheim. This is the Swedish border right here. So somewhere in here, they had to push back. And they, Norwegians always do outside stuff. So they stayed in these holiday huts and they were able to catch him. He was on his way to Soviet Union. And this is Mission Hotel today. So the actual trial, it took 11 months to get all his indictments. There are 29 co-defendants, including 7 women. And he escaped. And there's, my friend said, there's something about that. He was beaten up when they caught him. So people were so angry at him when they caught him up in the mountains, but he escaped. And there's some people think maybe he was caught, let go on purpose. People, because he was only 5 foot. But he eventually was caught. And so this is the most important takeaway, I think, of Quisling, is that they wanted to restore their system. So they hired Trondheim's best lawyer, which was Torvald Vig. And so the Germans had destroyed the legal system. Sami is the indigenous people way north. And he later worked in the Trondheim City Court. I got to handle the original documents when I was there. And this is how the trial looked. So this is all the judges. These are all the defendants right here, all 29 of them. This is their lawyers. And here is the prosecutor there. And then you would stand here if you were a witness. And I didn't have time to get in there. They closed when I was there, but this is how it looked in the 40s. And they had people from all over the world. So here's that horrible poster again. And people would wait for the little bus to come to the mission house, mission hotel. And they'd wait and watch to see who's coming. This is the most notorious one of the group. This is Kitty Grande. And her husband had been, he was actually assassinated by Renan. But these women were very active in Renan's group. You can see he got beat up a little bit there. Took 6 hours to read the indictment. This is really interesting for people who write mysteries. This is I actually have a full copy of this. This is like a story, setup board for your novel, but this is actually the real, they lay out where everything was with a basement. So they had WC. So guard room, this, these are the stairs going down and they had different rooms here. So here's the poster. And I don't think they had disassembled this yet. This is all stuff to put in evidence. So they had a couple of people reenact what had happened to them. And this is the most disturbing one. So Dolman was one of the top men under Renan. And they're just showing this person was murdered just a few days before liberation. He was with XU and they chopped him up. That really happened. It's the barbarity is just mind-boggling. This is today. So here's the laundry room. This might be the laundry room. This is the main room. Someone was renting it there when I was there, and so we couldn't go inside. It was too quick to get in there and make arrangements to go see it. But I think actually the Justice Museum might be looking into taking it on and maybe making it part of the museum. And this is Christensen in September. I was told when we'd been up there that you would look to the right. I think the building's down here. You would see these doors, and this is where people were held before they were executed. So we're talking about resistance. But they said when it came to executing him, they said, you want to go over there because they did not want his blood be on the blood of people who had been executed. And he was cremated and buried in unmarked grave in Levanger. What's shocking is that they had a payroll of $75,000. They had what they call negative agents. They're using, they think they're working for an organization. And it shows you how we think today with the internet and all the stuff we have going on. Back then, you were naive in a lot of ways. You just wanted to help your country. Right. And you could be fooled by these people. So some of the things that happened, they were on rations. I have two friends that all came over in the 50s as little kids. And because you just couldn't have it. And I'll just read the poem from Televogue, because this is what I think, this poem, I think when I started reading everything about Nora. I was reading poetry. I wanted to know the culture because I knew nothing. But this is the last part of Televogue. And I have to say that it was restored. It was the first thing they did. Architects from all over the country got together and they built housing for all the surviving people. It was like the top priority. They built a center where people could gather and all that. But this is this wonderful poem. It says, my life turns to memories, all my thoughts are gone. But one thing is burned into me, this we could never have done, just out of hatred, take a child from its mother, butcher 60 cows for one dead soldier. Take the old men and kill them with torture that drives you mad. Burn down poor people's houses, all they ever had. These are just simple fishermen. When the prison boat pulled away, everything that got them and the children is deep within to stay. Behind the seductive face, the traitor's outstretched hand, they will see a glimpse of their dead father and Televogue that burned. In these whispers of children, the dream takes on its power, and our Norway lives, waiting its hour. So this poem was written, I think, published in September of 1945. But anyway, that's my talk.
That's great. So tell me, so I know that I was there on the night that you got awarded, were named International Book Club Pick of the Year. So there are 12 books each year picked by the Pulpwood Queens. There you go. For the international pick, one a month, and then all the book clubs vote and named you that. What was that like?
I was floored. I kind of knew what was going to happen because Kathy emailed me. And when it said, congratulations, I thought, oh, it's Kathy, what's going on? And then I read the email. I couldn't believe, I told her I cried.
Oh, that's,
because, this book was hard. It's a hard subject.
Yeah.
And, I'm just thrilled that, that people have read something that is hard, but also hopeful, and so I feel so good. I feel really deeply honored and so touched. It still makes me cry. It's an amazing honor. I mean, I went to my first Pulpwood Queen girlfriend weekend, I think 2017, because it had actually been picked. The Timber Rose had been picked.
Right.
I couldn't go till 17. And, I went down there like, what the heck is going on? I mean, that was the year with Diamonds, with the girls' best friend. It wasn't your book that as Diamond in the Rough. Was that your book club that came as Diamond in the Rough, or that was another book club?
Yeah, no, yeah, we did. We were the coal miners.
I know, that was
Yeah.
amazing. So I'm going like, okay, this is what it's about, because I can only pack what I can
That
put
was
on.
my group. That was my group of authors. So that was Patty
Yeah,
McCall that did A Mother's
yeah,
Dance, and J.C. Sasser that did Gradle Bird, and Bren McLean, One Good Mama Bones.
yeah,
Yeah, that was
yeah.
our crew. We all came from Charleston and dressed like coal miners.
That was, I saw
Funny.
pictures of that.
We didn't have to wear
So-
curtains or anything. So I do have a writer that's joined us today, one of our
Oh.
readers and writers. So Patricia Frisch. Patricia, I have you muted. Oh, no,
Yeah, I'm
muted now.
unmuted.
There you go. Did you have any questions for Janet
Yeah.
before you say
Well,
goodnight?
I was surprised it was like that in Norway. I don't know why. You hear about other places. You hear about Amsterdam with Anne Frank, or
Right,
I mean, I write about theology and mysticism and so forth, and there are a lot of women theologians who risk their lives to speak out all over Europe.
Yeah.
But I just didn't know what had happened in Norway. So that was very informative, and knew what happened to the women and children and so forth. It was
I think,
added to what I know.
I know, and I think when you, why did I write it? I can't really, why did I dream about Summer in the Snow? I have to say that I was a student in France in 66, 67. So we did almost 6 months in our chosen country. I knew when I walked into Kalamazoo College, I would be going to France. So, but the thing that really struck me is it's all these years, now 53 years, good grief. But that I saw this monument in Vichy, because we went to Vichy and then we went to Clermont-Ferrand, which is further south. And honestly, they speak Oxford, beautiful French in Vichy. You go to, it's like going to Bronx when you go down Clermont. It's like, you're listening really hard to the conductor on the bus. But anyway, I saw this plaque for 25 kids shot by the Gestapo. And I think that has stayed with me all these years. And it's interesting you talk about the church, because in Norway, they try to Nazify the church. And almost all, Trondheim has Nidaros, which is this incredible, beautiful cathedral. St. Olaf was buried there. And so I think they started building a structure over his grave, probably the late 10th century, so it'd be about 1050. And I think Nidaros, the cathedral, they started building at the end of that century into the 1100s. It's stunning. It's just as beautiful as the French cathedrals, but it has Viking gargoyles. And so this plaza that you go out onto, it can hold quite a few people. They now have a very modern, kind of a gift shop in a place you can get stuff. But it had a archbishop there. It's now a beautiful art museum. And then the armory is the Resistance Museum there. But anyway, it's stunning. But one of these stories that I read out of this book, because I'm trying to figure my way, what are my characters, what are they doing, what's happening around them, is that when they try to Nazify, I think it's February 42, that's when the teachers went on strike, and the churches have none of it. And so a lot of them resigned. And so they had to get somebody for Trondheim, because Nidaros is like the national church. All the kings since then have been crowned there. But its history goes way, way back way back. And, at first it was Catholic, and then it's been a strong Lutheran church, since the Reformation. So anyway, this new guy who was a Nazi they had him come in and give his first, sermon. I think 3 people showed up, and the place is enormous. It's like any other main huge cathedral in Europe. This little group of people showed up. But
they used the Christians' sermons and charisma and everything else. So do you know that Hitler eventually took over the place of Jesus in the sermons when they were preaching, started pairing himself with Jesus, and then slowly he was the savior for Germany and the German people and everything. And they're all, you know, taking it in, sitting there. There were two popes that had encyclicals that they sent out and wanted all of the priests to read them in the churches, saying in Germany, don't vote for this party coming in. You know, there's something really bad about it. Well, you know, people listen to the sermon and they go have breakfast, right? You know, and nobody listened. They were trying to say, you know, this is scary, what's going on, you know. But the other thing I was thinking about, you were talking about the Viking symbols on the churches of the building. I know the Vikings had a big presence in places like Norway, Ireland, England, didn't they? They coming down and they became part of the culture, or they intermarried with people. Isn't that true?
Oh yeah, well, the Shetland Islands was like a colony of Norway for a long, long time, since about 1000. And, you know, one of my friends was an Air Force chaplain up in northern Scotland, and he's Norwegian descent. And he said, you know, there's 100 words up there, like kirke is kirk, you know, in Scots, and barn is bairn, you know, so there's a lot of words in there. I was going to continue with Nidaros, because what happened is the guy gave the sermon, and a few showed up. About 2 hours later, the former dean of Nidaros showed up, and I think 2,000, maybe 3,000 people packed that little square. They sang Rock of Ages, and then they disappeared because they would have gotten in trouble. But that was their protest. And I, when I got to that square, I had to go ask, you know, do you know that story? And one of the guides there said yes. But to me, I thought, yeah, that's how they, you know, they did their protest. And a lot of people continued to have, you know, groups going on at home, kind of thing. But they try to Nazify the schools. The teachers protest. Some were sent, 100 were sent up way north in very brutal conditions because it's winter, and they won. They finally said, okay, we won't Nazify the school, because there's stuff happening with the Nazis, you know, with Russia especially. There's things happening on, but yeah, and so like what for Bonnevet Connie Svensson, that was a church-run thing. His father started the Deaf Church in the 1890s. And he became, you see pictures of him with his you know, his ruff that looks like a donut. And, you know, but he was ordained in the 1930s, but very respected. And that's part of CBORG, this civilian organization. It's the church, labor unions, teachers, and the newspapers. They also ran the secret newspapers. So that he was very high up. He was one of the top 3. Everything. You would never know that from him. He had to escape because he had a conference in his school, which is south of, I think it's Nordland. It's south of Oslo. And maybe one of the days I'll go see it. But he had a conference there. It's resistance, but you think it's part of the church, you know, and the deaf school. And someone fingered him. So he had to escape. But after the war, he was a member of, I think he's vice president of International Rotary. And he finally got to meet Helen Keller. She came to Switzerland for a conference. So, but he continued to preach in the church. The church is gone now. I have a picture of the old church, which my friend George got baptized in. His parents got baptized in. So.
Well, Janet, thank you very much for joining us today. I am going to stop recording now, and we will share this on the Main Street Reads page and our YouTube channel as well. And thanks for joining us, Patricia.